Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for some holiday inspiration. And today I'll be making a one-layer holiday card featuring Penny Black's beautiful new bird stamp. This stamp is called Feathers and Twigs, and I just love coloring in this stamp. It's just a beauty, and I love the way that it can be positioned sort of off on the left-hand side of the card. I'm also using a sentiment from the new Love and Peace transparent set, which has a lot of great sentiments that can be used throughout the winter season, not just at Christmas. Now here's a quick look at the supply list, but I wanted to just pop that up there and let you know I will put that back up at the very end of the video. So if you want to take a closer look at it then, you can just hit pause and it'll be right up on screen for you at the very end of the video. So to begin, I have put my stamp into my Misty Stamp Positioning Tool, and I am inking this up using archival ink, and I am using the mini size, which is really great for getting into the small spaces on the stamp. And the first color that I'm using is called Potting Soil, and I'm just putting that onto the sort of trunk and twigs and branches area and avoiding the bird as best as possible. If I get a little bit onto the bird, then I just kind of swipe it off with my finger. You could also use a baby wipe or a paper towel to swipe that off if you get it in the wrong place. But this stamp is pretty easy to ink up without having to do any type of masking or painter's tape or anything on there. Now I am stamping it multiple times because I'm stamping onto some watercolor paper. This is hot press watercolor paper, so it's a little smoother than a cold press watercolor paper, but I wanted a really deep, rich, dark color on all of those twigs and branches. So I'm doing it a few times, especially areas where there's a lot of dark solid area. There's a couple of spots. Now I'm going to ink up the bird, and for the bird I'm using the color Shadow Gray. And this is a really great color if you want to sort of get the no-line watercoloring look, but it's really easy because you can see it well enough when you're painting it in. I find this color seems to sort of take on whatever colors you put on top of it. So I had that all stamped up, and I also added a sentiment, and I am going to paint this in using Distress Reinkers used as watercolors, and I'm just putting those down onto the Wendy Vecchi ink palette. This is a great little portable palette that you can put your colors on, and because it's white, you can see them when you pull them off to the side. You can mix colors on it. Just gives you a good look at what colors you're using. Instead of using a clear acrylic block, it's a little difficult to see those colors. So I'm going to start. The color I'm using here is Gathered Twigs, and all of the exact colors will be listed at the very end of the video in that supply list. And for this, I'm just focusing on painting in sort of the trunk of that tree. And I'm mixing in just a little bit of water. And I'm not worried about doing too much shading. There's so much detail here to the twigs and the trunk part of the tree that you don't need to do a lot of shading to add visual interest. That's right there in the image for you. But I will add just a couple of places here where I want that to go a little bit darker. And while it's still wet, I can just drop that ink on and blend it out using some water. You can see when I go off to the side, I'm just picking up more ink just to deepen up that color even more. You could really play around with this trunk too. You could almost make it like a birch trunk. I think that would be really pretty for winter time too. And just paint some cool grays on it for shadows, but leave most of it white. And I think that would be really striking as well. And once I have that painted in, I'm going to move into the branches, and do not be scared by these branches. It looks like it's really busy and it would be difficult to paint, but once you go, it goes pretty fast. And again, there's so much interest happening there within the stamp that you don't have to spend a lot of time on shading for it to look complete. So I just picked a few of the larger branches, basically just randomly, and I'm putting that Gathered Twigs Distress ink on that. And when I made this card, I pre-stamped several different panels using the MISTI with the trunk and the bird and different sentiments. And then it's because it's a one layer card, you can just take this with you with your paints or your colored pencils or whatever you like to use to color and have a whole bunch ready to go, and you can just color them in. And you get really fast at painting in all these different twigs and branches because I just painted all the same ones brown and all the same ones the other colors, so you don't have to spend much time deciphering, well, what color should I put where? So this is a great stamp if you're looking to do sort of mass produce holiday or winter cards. As you can see, this sentiment would be great even for New Year's or a birthday. So now I'm going to pull in, and just so that everything doesn't look too brown over on that side, I'm going to use a few other colors on some of the branches. And the colors that I'm using off there on my palette are Rusty Hinge, Scattered Straw, and a little bit of green peeled paint. And I didn't want very much of this orange, but just a touch. To me, that's kind of like an earth tone, but a little bit more lively. So I'm just putting a touch here and there on a few of those twigs. And I started light and then just darkening it up so that it doesn't look quite as peachy looking. Next is Scattered Straw. And I'll add that in just a few places. And then finally, I'll just pick up a little bit of that peeled paint and add that in too. So I have sped up this coloring portion of the video, otherwise you might get a little bored with me. But you can see that it's pretty quick to color in those different twigs and branches. And I decided up there just to paint that brown so that the corner just looked more finished to me. So now I'm ready to start working on the bird, and you will notice that my sentiment changed. I actually spilt on that one that I was working on. So I grabbed one of those extra ones that I had painted, and I did up the trunk and the branches the same, and now I'll paint the bird on here. And for this bird, I am painting him with some red right here, so I'm using Fired Brick. I put down a very light layer of water, just so it would be easy to blend out that red. And I only applied the water to the area where I was going to put the red. And don't worry, his beak and his eye look a little strange, but we will fix that up as we go. And if you stay tuned at the very end of the video, I will show a second card where I used a different color combination on the bird, and it totally changes the look of the entire stamp. So if you love birds and painting different birds, this is a fun one because you can just switch things up and give it a whole different look. So once that was dry and I dried it with my heat gun, I'm ready to add some color to the rest of the bird. And for this, I am using the Gathered Twigs color again. So this kind of kept things pretty neutral with just the pop of red on the bird, which I thought was fun. But the card at the end, the second card, the bird has a lot more colors, blue and orange, and so that really pops more against the trunk. So you just can, like I said, get a lot of different looks with this. This also would be a great bird if you wanted to fussy cut it out. You could add it then sort of peeking out inside of a wreath. It's really simple shape to cut out, so it gives you a lot of options there. And as I add this paint, I'm kind of putting that down right as it's dry, putting it where I want it to be darkest. And then I go back and get a little more water on my brush, and that allows me to blend it out. Now by stamping the bird with that shadow gray color, I find that that color seems to sort of just pick up whatever color you put on top of it. But you still get all of that wonderful detail that's a part of the stamp. It's an archival ink, so it's waterproof, so none of that detail starts to blend or fade out as you paint, but you can sort of color it up so it's not a total black outline. And so for me, it's the best of both worlds with no line watercoloring, but also keeping the detail of the stamp. Now, after I finished painting that in, I decided I wanted to add some of that red that's on the bird into those branches. So the ones that I had painted orange, I just went over those with that fired brick color just to tie in that red in a few places into the branches. Now, I'm so sorry my head is covering this up, but I am taking a very fine tip black pen. This is a Pitt Artist pen by Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft, and I just colored over the eye and the beak. So even though you're looking at my head, I wanted to leave this in here so I remembered to tell you. That way you don't have to worry about those stamping them in a darker color. You can just easily go right over top. Now, to create a little contrast in that area between the bird and the branches, and because the bird was the same shades as the tree trunk and a lot of the twigs, I am painting the sky in. And to do this, I'm using the colors of blue print sketch and a tiny little touch here and there of peacock feathers. And that gives it a little bit of a turquoise look in a few places. Now, in between all those little branches, just a note, everything has been dried with the heat gun, so you don't get too much reblending. I'm not doing any type of shading. I'm just diluting down that Distress Reinker with water and then just painting in between the branches. And to be honest, the colors of those branches are pretty dark. If you go over them a little bit, it's not a big deal. It doesn't show at all. So you don't have to be too fiddly painting in here. It goes pretty quickly. And this is another place where you can really change the look of the stamp and the image by what color you paint in the background. You could do sort of sunset colors or yellows and oranges if you wanted a warmer look. You could also keep things neutral and do a very light gray or a very light tan, like an antique linen color would be really pretty. But I like some contrast, and so that's why I chose to do the blue. Now in this more open area, I did put down a layer of water first, and to me that's just a little bit more forgiving as I want to fade things out into the white and working in a larger area. So I put down the water first and then put down the ink into that water, and that just helps it fade out to the lighter color. I do end up adding a few more layers to those areas because the water does water down the intensity of the color a little bit, but it gives you more time to sort of blend things out. Because I just wanted that blue sky area around the bird. So I finished doing that down at the bottom as well, and I'm just adding a little touch more of gathered twigs. As I was working, I thought, I think he needs a little bit more right up here, so I'm just popping a little bit of that onto the bird. Just a few places here and there. Now I went ahead and made sure everything was dry using my heat gun, and I'm going to add some Distress ink around the edges. And I'm starting with the antique linen, and I'm using an ink blending tool and a foam pad, starting off of the edge and working on in a circular motion, focusing mainly around the outer perimeter of the card. And I go right over those branches and twigs and all of that. This is such a light color that you don't lose any of your painting that you've already done. And then I'm also going to use the color of potting soil. So this is just the larger ink pad of the one we used to ink and stamp those branches. And I'm adding this just on the corners primarily. Just wanted to warm that up a little bit more and balance out the darkness on the left of the card with the right hand side. And I chose these inks not because of the properties of the ink, but mainly because of the colors. So you can use whatever colors you prefer. Now I've grabbed a few snowflakes. This is from our miniature transparent set called North Pole. And I've positioned them on my stamp positioning tool. And I'm going to stamp them onto the background. And I'm using that antique linen color. And this is very light, but by using it in a stamp positioning tool, I can do it a few times, and that just gets it to the right intensity. It just darkens things up a little bit. Like this one, I wanted to be a little bit darker, so I did it a third time. Now I'm going to splatter some snow onto the background, but I didn't want it to go all over my sentiment. So I'm just using some little pieces of Post-it tape. I put it over the sentiment and also over the bird's face because I didn't want to end up with like a big splat right on his face. And I'm using the Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus watercolors. This is the titanium white. And I just pour a little on an acrylic block, pick it up with a little bit of water in my paintbrush and just splatter away. I like using this. It's watercolor, so it's easy to clean up. So if you just go splatter crazy, you can just take a baby wipe and wipe it up off your work surface. And I find when it dries, it just dries a little bit lighter. And then I can go in with a gel pen and add some more opaque snowflakes. And I like the combination of the two. I think it just gives a little more depth to have some lighter snowflakes and then some sort of brighter, more opaque ones with the gel pen. And then I'm also going to take that gel pen and just add a tiny little dot on the bird's eye to bring him to life. And that completes this card. Just mount it to a card base and you have a 1-layer holiday card that's easy to mail and just a lot of fun. If you like to color, this is a really great one to sit down and have some fun coloring. And as I promised, I also have a second color scheme here for you to see. So you can see how that it's the same design completely, but it totally changes the look by changing the color of that bird. If you enjoyed today's video, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, and our blog and website. I've linked to all of those down in the YouTube description box below. And as promised, here's also that supply list. Thanks for watching.